Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Rouge Rugby podcast, where we talk about real Canadian rugby. I'm Stu Hardy, joined as always by Derek Brissett. Derek, it's been the Arrows bye week. There's only been 4 games available, but good news, we have a great interview coming up later. But of the 4 games, or should I say 3.5?
3.5, that's correct.
What did you make of the overall weekend?
Yeah, I mean it was entertaining. Kind of unfortunate, I guess, that that DC Dallas game ended at halftime. But I mean, based that picture that I can't remember who it was, but it was somebody on the Dallas Jackals like Facebook fan group. They posted like a picture from, I guess, like a tunnel that leads out into the stadium of what the Lightning looked like. And it basically looked like Galactus was coming to eat the Earth. So I think it was probably the right call from Major League Rugby to cancel that game. Unfortunate for the Jackals, I guess, that DC scored in the last minute of the half. Which is that's an unfortunate. That's a tough break for Dallas. Who seems to be a team that can never have a break go their way. So that's super unfortunate. I think if we were, I mean, we can kind of get into it a little bit more, but if I were to kind of give a bit of a quick rundown, San Diego still probably proving that they're the class of the league right now. Really good win against Utah. I mean, they overcame 3 first half yellow cards. Right. So, I mean, I think because Mikey Teo's yellow was in, I think, the 35th minute. So, like, I guess they spent 30 of the first 45 minutes of the game down a man. And, Luke Burton did well to kind of keep the scoreboard ticking over for them. When Teo wasn't in the bin, he was pretty fun battle between him, even though Teo was playing on the wing, but him and fullback Caleb McEnany from Utah, as far as like watching the kicking battle going back and forth, a couple nice kicking exchanges, them trying to pick their spots on when to run, and both of them really had a few moments to shine in that game. So that was a super fun battle to watch take place. And then obviously Michael Smith got his first try since returning from med school, which was also great to see. I still can't figure out what NOLA is at all.
Yeah. Shall we get into the scores and
game
sure.
Game? Yeah, maybe let's do this in order. Yeah, why not?
Okay, so the weekend started with Atlanta versus Chicago. There seemed to be a close fixture to begin with before Atlanta were able to take the home advantage, with the final score being Atlanta 27, Chicago 12. I don't think we were really surprised by this result in the end.
Other than the fact that it's an Eastern Conference team beating a Western Conference team.
That is true.
That's a rare case.
Well, you say that. The next game we go into is a Eastern Conference team beating a Western Conference team as well.
No, that's Mother Nature beating a Western Conference team.
No, that's Thor siding with DC to beat Dallas.
Wow, that's blasphemous. There's lightning. There's a lot of lightning-based DC characters, though. You got like Black.
Exactly,
Lightning,
that's the
Black
thing.
Lightning, Static. Like there's the Flash,
I know that's how shocking it
symbol.
is that Thor has abandoned Marvel, and he's just gone over to DC. He wants to see what it's like on the East Coast. He wants to.
I guess so. Man, what a traitor, eh?
Anyway, Atlanta 27, Chicago 12. As we've mentioned before, Dallas 3, DC 7. That try at the end of the first half, basically becoming the last score of the game as the clock went red. And as you mentioned, Utah 16, San Diego 26. Yeah, I think this is a masterclass in understanding how to handle yellow cards, how player management, disciplinary issues for the team itself.
Yeah.
But something that was pointed out, and this is from Brian Ray from America's Rugby News, is that Ma Nonu picked up his 3rd yellow card this season, which means that he will automatically be suspended from the next game. So
I find that to be somewhat of a strange rule, to be honest with you. I mean, I'm not I'm not saying Nanu didn't deserve his yellow card or anything, but it's like the blanket, like just 3 yellows, because yellows can be like Nanu got a yellow for some head contact, which I mean, fair enough. But like you can get a yellow for just being like the fourth guy that went offside in a row. Like you can get yellows for just like non-malicious suspension worthy things. Right.
true.
You
I
can
think
get a yellow for dropping an intercept attempt, and the ref's like, that was intentional. Right. Like you can get yellows for non like you know what I mean? Like non, I guess
I
I don't
can
want to
kind
say
of see where you're coming
non-violent,
from.
but like non-contact related
Yeah. But the thing is, on
things
the
or
other
whatever.
side is that the referee. So, for example, like repeated infringements, for example, someone get a yellow card from that.
Yeah.
The ref has gone to the captain a couple times already and said, if your players keep doing this, then I'm gonna get the
Yeah,
card
but
out. So,
that's not.
so the warning's been there. I can understand
No,
where you're coming from,
I'm
but
not saying the player shouldn't get a yellow card for doing that. I'm just saying it's like if you have like I don't know what all of Nanu's yellows are, but I think there's a difference between like if you had like 3 like head contact yellows, then
yeah,
sure. I'm not sure what all of Nanu's yellow cards are in saying this, to be honest with you, off the top of my head. But I think there's a difference between like 3 like head contact yellows and then like 1 head contact yellow, 1 you were the fourth guy that went offside, and 1 yellow for dropping and then for an intentional knock on 5 meters off the try line. Right? It's like they're not like there's a difference in like scale, I think, of like how you can because you could get a repeat infringement yellow 3 times. And
yeah.
it's all you've done is gone offside. Like I don't think you need to be suspended for going offside 3 times. I
I don't
guess
know
kind of
if you
where I'm
can't
going with
listen to
that.
the same warning multiple times across multiple games, maybe you do need a V suspend just so you can go to an ear
Yeah.
doctor and just make sure that your
You know what?
hearing's up to
Actually, I was going to
scratch.
say if you're going offside that much, your own coach probably wants you suspended. That's the actual punishment if you get 3 like consecutive repeat infringements should be you have to actually play 80 minutes. Like you're forced to play 80 minutes for the next game.
Yeah,
That's the punishment.
that's an interesting punishment. I wouldn't really call it punishment. Oh,
Punishment for your team. It's the
yeah, but not for you as an
No, well,
individual.
maybe depends on how your coach views your play.
So yeah, but with that result, like San Diego was firmly stating themselves as like the best in the West.
Oh, for sure, best in the West, best
You
in
know,
the league.
yeah. New England was on a bye this week, so it's hard to tell. But I mean, if that is the final, San Diego versus New England, that is going to be a cracker to watch. But yeah, this is also Utah's first loss at home this season as well. I mean, they were able to turn it around against New England, but in this outing, it was the Legion that just stood on top, really. That takes us to the final game of the weekend, which was New York versus NOLA. And the score, I think, it's one of these things of circumstances, and the score doesn't really reflect the game itself. So even before kickoff, Eric Howard was a late withdrawal. Dougie Fife was then forced off through injury with under 4 minutes of the clock being played. There just seemed to be a lot of injuries happening in the early stages for NOLA. Like Devin Short had to sit out in like the 21st minute, and as well. Yeah, it's just as in if nothing goes to plan, and then suddenly you're guys that were originally planning to only be on like for 25-30 minutes and now having to come in to do the full stint. I mean, yes, they are trained to be able to play that way. And admittedly, the first score was by Nola with a try from Duplessis, one of his 2 tries of the game. But then, New York just turned it around, of course. It was Andrew Coe that got the scoring started, getting the first of his 2 tries of the game.
Yeah.
But then, basically after that, the floodgates opened. Like Emery, Fidau, Fuatai, all scoring tries, basically confirming the try bonus point, and it's only at the 30-minute mark. And that's not even bringing to account that Buckley scored 3 minutes after Fuatai. So, yeah, four tries in the space of, 12 minutes, 5 tries in the space of 33. Dylan Fawcett, obviously, highest try scorer in MLR history. He had to get an extra one on his now that Rickert Hatting is slowly creeping up on his total. But yeah, and then I think in the second half it was Emery and Co scored again, try each within like the first 5 minutes. Jason Emery scoring 7 out of 8 conversions, and then it was we've built a lead. We'll step off the gas, and that's when Cam Dolan scored for Nola before Duplessis got his second. But yeah, the final score: New York 54, Nola 19. And yeah, I think those injuries really hit Nola hard, and
I mean,
hopefully they can recover in time for who are they playing next? Oh, San Diego Legion. Like you said, Derek, it's it's all going well for them.
Yeah, I mean, I think the injuries definitely hurt Nola, but at the same time, I'm like, Nola's been doing this all year. Like Nola's whole, I mean, going back to the few pods we when you weren't here and we had James on the show, it's like we were talking about just like they're like the definition of Jekyll and Hyde. It's like they're either great or they stink, and there's like weirdly like no in between. And quite frankly, their record of 5-6 reflects that. It's like they're either great or they stink. Like, and like there's been some games that they've played this year where you're like, wow, like they look like they could be one of the best teams in the league. They almost like
even the previous fixture when New York came to Nola, everyone was like, okay, the Gold losing again, and then they put in the best performance of the season.
Well, it's like they started the season 0-3. Right. Then they went on a 3-game winning streak. They started the season 0-3. They looked like one of the worst teams in the league. Well, maybe not one of the worst teams in the league, but they definitely looked in the bottom of the league. And then they went on a 3-game winning streak where they looked like one of the best teams in the league. And then they've just kind of been flip-flopping, going back and forth. Right. And it's like they can't really decide I can't decide if they're good or bad at this point. Right. Because it's like it totally depends on what NOLA team shows up. And as you kind of mentioned, there were some injuries, so that impacts what team shows up. But every team's dealing with injuries. New York's got a lot of injuries. They looked okay in this game. They looked like they dealt with it all right. So I'm not really sure. Like the one saving grace that NOLA has is that it appears that nobody in the East can decide if they're a good team or a bad team. Right? With like you have Old Glory 5-5, New York 5-6, NOLA 5-6, and ATL 5-5. Right. So you got New England's probably most likely going to run away with this and be the first place team in the East. And then you got Toronto, which unfortunately, despite the fact that everybody is at barely floating at 500 right now, they're probably a little too far back. As we mentioned on the last episode, you can switch their focus to being like start ruining people's ears because there's 4 teams ahead of you with only 5 wins, and quite frankly, there's 4 teams ahead of you with only 5 wins and probably 2 playoff spots to contest for. So there's a lot of potential to start ruining people's ears, or at least throw a huge wrench into everybody's plans. And I mean, you can in theory go from 5th in the East to 2nd in the East in one game right now, like depending on how every other game kind of pans out. And it's like week in, week out. I mean, we're highlighting NOLA, but it feels like week in, week out, everybody's kind of, has a great game, has a bad game, has a great game, has a bad game. New England hasn't lost to to an Eastern Conference team yet, but everybody else is just kind of like beating down on each other. Right. Even at the bottom of the league, you have the little, as far as like the 1-9, 1-10 teams are concerned, you have that little like triangle of sadness that's there where Toronto beat Chicago beat Dallas beat Toronto. Right. So you get the little triangle of sadness. And that's also kind of happening in the Eastern Conference with all these teams that are barely floating at 500. Right. So, which is completely different than the West, which, is looking like a pretty solid team is probably going to miss the playoffs. And these games that between San Diego, Seattle, Houston, and Utah are all going to be really huge coming down the stretch, because they're all teams that seem like they're really great, but they all have, for some reason, ended up in the same conference. And it's very odd looking at the conference imbalance right now.
Yeah, definitely peculiar. It's not what we've seen over like the past few years. But
no, yeah, it's bizarre. The West is kind of beating down on the East. I mean, this week's results aside, but
yeah,
I feel like that maybe slightly has impacted how skewed, or at least, especially earlier in the season, how skewed the standings look. With the Western Conference pretty much almost all being above 500, with the exception of Dallas and Chicago, and then the East is barely floating at that. So
I will say that with all the points being calculated, that the only confirmed thing so far is that having played 11 games and with only 10 points, and third place currently having 36 points, it means that Dallas is now the first team that has been eliminated from playoff contention.
Are they?
Yeah.
No,
because they only have 5 games left, so they only have 25 points available, so they're out. And it's like, and it probably is going to be likely that Chicago, unless they, they need a win, and then everyone else needs to lose. So it looks as though Chicago will also be eliminated this weekend as well. The Arrows have a bit more breathing room because they have
because all the teams stink.
If that's how you want to describe it, I mean, I'm saying that because it's so evenly contested in the East, that they still have a few weeks to like
4-game winning streak. You're right back in it. So
absolutely,
fingers crossed. Fingers crossed.
Well, speaking of that 4-week winning streak that is coming up, we have the round 13 predictions to make. So up first, we have Toronto versus Atlanta on the Friday night. Derek, who are you going with?
Yeah, this is actually a big Toronto versus Atlanta weekend. We got Arrows versus Rugby ATL, and then the Jays are playing the Braves in a 3-game series at the Sky Dome. So might be a bad time to mention that Chipper Jones is my favorite baseball player growing up. So I'm going to take Atlanta in baseball, but I'm going to stick with Toronto in the rugby game.
All right. I'm hoping that Toronto have taken the bye week. The players have been able to recover. We'll get more.
Yeah, that'd be nice. Get some guys back from the injured list.
Yeah, we're getting guys back from the injury list. So I will. And, last time they came back after a bye week, they got a win. So
true.
I'm going
against the green and white team.
Yeah, so I'm going to go for double, and also I want to see the cracked ice kits.
Those look cool. Those look cool. The fangs out T-shirts and stuff. I'm glad they explained what that meant, because I had no idea. But I as I've said all year, I love that the Arrows are diving more into the aviation side of their team name and what that history is and what that history means to them. I think they look good, and it looks like too. I'll give props to the Arrows for this, because there's been a handful of teams. So obviously, it looks like the cracked ice jersey is black and with the blue cracked ice motif. But it looks like they have black shorts to actually match the black jersey too, which a lot of teams haven't been doing. Right, like even like Chicago had the Bulls jersey, but they didn't, like, the shorts still had the big green Chicago Hounds logo, and there's been a couple other teams that have gone with like a different color than their like base set jersey, and like the shorts don't match the new jersey. So I like that the Arrows went the extra mile and actually decked it out in like a full head to toe proper kit. So I do enjoy that.
Yeah, I think especially like last year they had the like red military kit, and then they had the blue short as well. It just clashed.
Exactly. I think these jerseys look a lot better when you go. Yeah. You have to go all out with the full like the full
whatever
head to
color you're
toe.
wearing. Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Okay. Next game up, we have NOLA versus San Diego to be held at the Gold Mine. I am going to stick with the West, and I'll go with San Diego.
Yeah, I'm going with San Diego too. I mean, at the end of the day, I think NOLA is a team that I can't decide if they're great or terrible. San Diego's a team that I know is great, so we'll stick with San Diego, even if they don't have Mananu this week.
Okay, now we have an interesting Western clash because it is third place hosting second place. It is Houston versus Seattle.
Yeah, this might be the biggest game of the weekend just because of the standings implications as the playoff races kind of creep on. I think though, to be honest, I think I'm just going to go with Houston for the sole reason that they're the home team.
I mean, that's fair enough. I can go with that. And just to be different, I will pick Seattle then. But yeah, I think this is going to be I'm hoping this is a close game, high scoring game as well. Definitely one for all the fans and not just the purists. Okay, fourth game is Dallas versus Utah. Provided there's no more lightning this weekend, so
yeah. Well, they say lightning doesn't strike twice in the same place. Yes, I don't know. I think you got to go with Utah on this team fighting for their playoff lives versus a team that maybe is kind of out of it and is playing.
Well, they are out of it. They are eliminated.
So. Yeah, so there you go. So, I don't know. I think Dallas will get another win this year. I don't think it'll be this week though.
Yeah, that's it. And a bonus point win for Utah puts them up to 33 points.
If you're a Western Conference team and you play Dallas, like you need a bonus point.
Yeah.
Dallas or Chicago, like you can't lose to those teams in that conference.
Yeah, but then the point I was making is that Utah, regardless of the final result from Houston or Seattle, is that they're then still within a stone's throw of those teams.
Yeah,
and Utah still has a bye week to. Utah's had their bye week as well as Houston and Seattle, so there's no real question of if this team plays or that team plays. So I think it'll be good for them to be able to, duke it out. And I mean, we've only got a couple more rounds where buys are being held before we just bring it into the final 3 weeks where we have all teams playing, just like this weekend, actually. Next up, we have DC versus New England. DC getting the win at the end, but have an extra 40 minutes of recovery.
Yeah.
And New England coming off the bye. Same with Seattle. It's not Seattle, San Diego. New England head and shoulders above the rest of the conference. So I'll be picking the Free Jacks.
Yeah, I think you got to know New England. It's tough. It's tough to pick against them at this point in the year.
Then we have the final game of the round. It is West hosting the East. It is Chicago hosting Rugby New York.
New York. Chicago let me down last week in the East for my West will beat the East prediction. So never picking them again.
Yeah, I think New York, they have had an injury problem for the past, I won't say month, but their game against NOLA proved that they still have the depth available to talent. And, with guys are now starting to come back from injury as well. So it's looking all on the up, all on the mend. So, yeah, I think you got to go with New York. So those games again, Toronto versus Atlanta, NOLA versus San Diego, Houston versus Seattle, Dallas versus Utah, DC versus New England, and Chicago versus New York. And for all those MLR games, you can watch them on the Rugby Network. And the Arrows games will be available on TSN, tsn.ca, the TSN app, and TSN Plus. We also have a World 7 Series this weekend. Apologies for getting it wrong last episode. Where the World 7 Series will come to Toulouse. This is the final round for the women's and the penultimate round for the men. And you can watch that on CBC and CBC Gem.
Sophie DeGoody playing for the women's team too.
Yeah, that was an announcement. It's going to be interesting to see. This is her first foray into sevens in the professional environment, but then again, a lot of 15s and sevens players have swapped from either style to the other. So, we have enough time between now and the Pacific Four series. So if we can stretch our legs, and by stretch our legs, I mean onto a ball so she can kick it between the posts, get those conversions. Always looks good. And yeah, and also as well, we have the final rounds of the Premiership, and we also have the URC semi-finals, and they are available on Sportsnet. So lots of rugby to be watching. However, that's really all we can talk about when it comes to MLR and rugby. But the good news is we do have a special guest. They are coming up right after this. And we are back, and we are with our special guest, a man who has many caps, has more strings to his bow than Robin Hood. Currently in Uruguay with the Canada men's under 20s as attack coach. He's also Canada's under 18s head coach and the head coach and the director of the Arrows Academy. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Cory Hector. Cory, thank you for joining us for this episode.
Thanks, guys. Excited to be here.
Wonderful. Well, when we have guests on, we always start with the same few questions just to get everything going. So, Cory, what got you started in rugby to begin with?
Well, it's like probably a lot of Canadian kids. I grew up playing hockey and thought I was going to the NHL. But in grade 9, I remember I was walking through the cafeteria and a high school teacher by the name of Brian Quisberg, who I still run into at Arrows games now. I think he had a video playing with had rugby on and was basically saying, I'm looking for 25 grade 9s to start a Bantam boys rugby team. Are you interested? And I didn't know a lot about rugby. And I decided to go out and started in grade 9 and haven't looked back ever since. And that was at Jacob Hespeler High School in Cambridge. So yeah, grade 9, 14 years old. The hockey thing didn't pan out. So after about grade 12, I focused a lot more on rugby.
Perfect. So you mentioned their high school teacher. Is there anybody else that, was kind of like influential, like as far as like, starting your rugby career, or even like maybe, making a couple of the decisions that kind of factored you into, being a coach for Rugby Canada and the Arrows Academy today?
Yeah, for sure. So Brian obviously got me into it in grade 9, and then probably the guy that had the biggest impact on my career was Daryl Devine. So Daryl coached me in my last couple seasons at the University of Guelph. I was a little bit older than most of the guys. I graduated a little bit later, but Daryl saw an opportunity to bring me onto the coaching staff right away. So Daryl and I started working together immediately after graduation, and then in fact, we did that for probably 3-4 years, and Daryl was actually selected to become the head coach for the Canadian University Sevens team that was going off to France in 2012. Daryl invited me to come along as an assistant coach. So it was my first representative coaching job, which is incredible. I had the opportunity to work with him there. I started working in Rugby Ontario a little bit, coaching age grade stuff. And then in 2016, Daryl stepped down from the University of Guelph, and I took over as head coach. So from going from playing for him, and then probably 4 or 5 years of really, really solid mentorship, I owe a ton to him.
All right. Well, we do have a few questions about Guelph and your ongoing time there, but we will get to that in a moment. So when you first started watching, and even up until today, who is someone that every time they step or did step onto the pitch, you would just love to watch them play?
So I remember in first year university, I think, or second year university, watching I'm going to age myself here, but the 2003 World Cup final, and Johnny Wilkinson winning that game. I stayed up all night and watched that game about 7 o'clock in the morning or whatever it was, and just being like blown away. I played fly half myself, so just being blown away at Wilco and what he could do. I think before that, Carlos Spencer. I remember, if you guys remember, like on Sportsnet on Sunday mornings, they would always have Super Rugby on, and just watching Carlos Spencer play for the Blues back then, and you know, of course, some of the famous stuff that he did with ball in hand. Loved him, and then always was like a diehard Dan Carter fan. So I didn't deviate too far from the number 10s, as you can see, but those are kind of the three guys that I just love to watch.
Everybody always gravitates to the position that they played, whatever ended up being.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so speaking of your career, you played for Guelph University Rugby as a student. What can you tell us about your student days and how it compares to new students joining the program now?
Well, it was quite a bit different. We were, you know, it was very much social. Like I feel like the guys that we probably saw in the first few weeks, maybe they picked up a piece of kit and then we didn't see them again, and that was just fine. It was very much, we were, you know, we weren't supported tremendously by the university, aside from, you know, kind of fields and jerseys or whatever. And truthfully, like, maybe our results reflected that, or I'm not sure which came first. So we struggled. Like we definitely weren't kind of where we are now. Towards the end of my playing days, we did start to get slightly better, but we were only ever, you know, kind of a middle of the pack team. You know, maybe like, I think about my last year, I think we were like 4-4. We started off the season 4-0. But we really didn't play anybody good, and then we lost 4 on the bounce heading into playoffs. So that was a bit humbling. But I think, you know, it was an amazing time. I met, you know, all of my close friends that I now stay in touch with, my best friends. So for that, like, I obviously wouldn't have traded it for the world. And then you know, moving straight into coaching, I got to make an impact straight away, and you know, all the things that maybe I felt we could be doing better as a player, we were able to start influencing as a coach, and slowly started moving that along. And 2013, we won our first bronze medal, and it was really then that was kind of a watershed moment for our program. The previous championship for the team was in 1998, so it'd been a bit of a dry spell in terms of medals. So 2013, we won our first bronze medal, and I think we really started to see our hard work paying off. And then the university started to take notice, and more we started getting more and more support. So we went bronze in 2013, bronze in 2014, silver in 2014, silver in 2015, championship in 2016 when I took over the program. And then we've been kind of silver for a few years between 2017 and 2021, and then 21, 22, we've won back-to-back championships. So we've seen like a really, really good evolution of the program. I think it's helped with recruitment. It's helped to attract players. The university's been tremendous in sort of increasing our support and working with us, and to really develop what I believe is a really excellent program for, you know, both students, but also aspiring rugby players.
You kind of mentioned, I'm kind of curious about some, you did say that like when you were playing, you mentioned it's kind of like maybe like a social sort of, I guess maybe almost like, I guess like a club kind of atmosphere. And you were saying like guys maybe pick up kit and then you never see them again. I'm assuming now it's kind of has a bit more of like a high performance vibe to it. So it's like, what kind of, like how, like, could you kind of maybe like give us like a rundown, kind of like what you are doing with the Guelph University rugby program right now, and like how that looks nowadays versus you know, as what you described, you know, years ago, it being more of like a social thing, and how that kind of maybe drove that evolution.
For sure. So I mean, part of it has been helped by numbers. Like we're able to carry a roster of 48 guys that all have sort of the same varsity level access. One of the biggest things is the support that we get from the university in a strength and conditioning department. So having the ability to have the guys in the gym 3 to 4 days a week, directed and planned by our strength and conditioning coaches, who also support what we're trying to do on field. So that's massive in terms of helping prepare the players to be better athletes, but then also keeping them healthy. The training week's pretty full on. We're usually on field 4 days a week ahead of our games. So it really is, in my opinion, like as close to a high performance environment as we can, just while the guys are being students. So everything is pretty thought out in what we do. Everything, we try to align everything as much as possible, whether it be the strength and conditioning to the on-field stuff. The difference is they're not only athletes, they also have to balance their schedules. So working with them to make sure that they're being good students, trying to put supports in place to help them do good in school, or stay in school, or move on, once they're graduating, that they're prepared to go into a career. So it really is like a full year holistic program to, try to develop really good people and really good athletes.
Yeah. And, kind of maybe going back to how things have maybe changed over the past, couple of years, but, have you noticed maybe like any, like, say, like an increase in like interest in like joining, say like the rugby team at the school, or like even like playing more like high school rugby since like, say, the MLR was introduced, and now that maybe guys see like a pathway to like, a possible professional career that may not have existed, say like back when you were playing for Guelph?
For sure. I mean, anytime I talk to high school age people about like going out to the games or sticking with rugby, it's not something that existed before. Like there was no aspirational pathway. You could play for your country, and even then that was hard to see. But now having rugby in their backyards, it is something they can see. They can get to know the players. They can see that they've come from the same places they're coming from. So I think it's tremendous. I think, coming out of the pandemic, the first year or so, like 21, maybe even 22 to an extent, I think we're tough in the high schools. But just anecdotally speaking to some of my colleagues that I know from the high schools, by all accounts, we're starting to see another like groundswell at some of the larger high schools. The programs that have been known to produce a lot of players, have strong rugby cultures, they're swelling again, which I think is highly encouraging. And I do think, part of that is certainly due to those coaches who are driving that, but, potentially the MLR, the opportunities that exist. And I'm certainly hearing from more and more people that are interested in being involved. They're interested in, coming to games and then meeting people and then seeing how they can do it. And, I'm lucky enough, my assistant coach at Guelph, Gary Robinson, his son, who I've known since he's probably been 5 years old. Gary has seasons tickets for the Arrows, and like Jack, his son, is like, he's going to be a Toronto Arrow. His sole goal is to like become a professional rugby player. Like he's at every single game. He's got signatures from every guy, and seeing that is super cool.
That's great to hear. Obviously getting a next generational talent in early, getting them to see the pathway that's ahead of them. I think that's really great news. Now, you first served as an assistant coach of the Guelph men's rugby team back in 2009. So what inspired you to move into coaching and stay with Guelph University in that capacity?
So I got into coaching quite young. So even during my undergraduate degree, I would often go back to my high school and help out. And with club rugby, I remember I was maybe 20 years old and I was a player coach for a men's club team. So I was always keenly interested. I got into it as a hockey player too, as my hockey career was sort of winding down. I ended up coaching a AA team with my uncle. So it was always something that I thought I was interested in. I love being a part of the game. And then, when the opportunity came and Daryl saw, potential to have me join, it just, it kept me close to the game. It provided a new pathway for me, which I thought, maybe showed potential. And more than anything, it kept me connected to the program that I really, really loved and what I felt I owed something back to. It was funny in my first year coaching though, because I had just graduated. So majority of players on the team were my friends. So figuring out how to balance all of that was quite interesting and quite a challenge. But yeah, it was just something that I think I always knew I was going to get into. I was always drawn to it, whether it be hockey or rugby. Coaching was something I figured I would get into.
As you were listing Guelph's successes, and you mentioned that you became head coach in 2016 and you won the OUA championship. You were also named the OUA coach of the year after your first year at the helm. What did it mean to you to receive that recognition?
I thought it was great. Truthfully, I was way more happy to actually win the championship. The group of guys that I had in 2016, they were guys that probably 2011, I really started to take a more heavy hand in recruitment. And so seeing all of those guys come through and really get to know and build strong relationships with those guys, and then to win a championship with them, that definitely meant more. The coach of the year thing was great. It just kind of happened on the back of a really excellent season. I think we went 8-0 during regular season, and then perfect through the playoffs, of course. But yeah, that was just maybe a little bit of icing on the cake. But certainly the big prize was winning the championship with that group of guys that I felt really close with. Eric Howard, actually, from the NOLA Gold, was on that team. He missed the game, unfortunately, because he played Ireland at Aviva the night before. Lucas Rumble actually flew home from Ireland to play in the game. After playing like 60 minutes at Aviva, took the red eye home and came into the game. And I'm not sure if you know this game went down as like one of the most epic games of all time. So Rumble, we were up early against Queens, and Rumble came on at probably like 55, thinking he's only going to play 25 minutes, except we were tied at the end of regulation. So then we played 2 10-minute overtimes, and we were tied at the end of that. So then we played a third. No. Then we played a third 10-minute sudden death, and we were tied after that. And it went into kicks. We won on kicks after playing 110 minutes of rugby, give or take. It was wild. One of the craziest experiences. I still get people come up to me being like, I can't believe that game, and it's been 7 years on now.
So you played 110 minutes of rugby, and you had guys on both rosters that played like a test match like the day before?
Well, Eric didn't fly back. He stayed in, but Rumble came in. He was expecting to maybe play 25 minutes and hopefully influence the game, but then he had to stay on for whatever it was, another 45, 50 minutes.
Who did you have kicking for Guelph when it came down to it at the end?
So we had 5 guys go. We had to select 5 guys, and it was actually drop goals. And everybody was so tired that, like, I think in the first round each team hit 1. And in the second round, it might have been 1-0, or it was like 2-2 and then 1. But the guy who hit the kick was a guy by the name of Mark Perrin. He hit one in the first round, and he hit one in the second round. All of the barriers came down. People rushed the field. It was wild.
Wow.
Oh yeah. Is there a video of this game that we can direct people to if they have 4 hours of time on the weekend?
Yeah, I think they're certainly kicking around somewhere, or some of the final moments are probably somewhere. It was quite the spectacle.
Maybe we can have it played at York Lions Stadium at halftime against the game.
A few former, like Kainoa Lloyd was also in that game, who played in the MLR. So Marcello Wainwright, who played in the MLR. Trying to think who else. I think that might have been it but good standard of guys that went on to pretty good careers.
Yeah, we got to do MLR off-season episode, Stu. We'll do a deep dive into this game. That'll be some of the off-season content that we can we'll drum up.
Yeah, Cory, if you find the footage, we'll do that episode.
I think Mark Perrin probably has it on repeat at his house. So.
Oh, okay, yeah. Well, that's where we'll do the podcast from. We'll go to his house and then just see the shrine from the Guelph versus Queens game. So I guess we'll transition to the Arrows Academy, but I'm going to ask I guess maybe one more I guess Guelph slash University Rugby kind of question here, and just looking at 2022 2023 right now, like what is kind of your opinion on the current state of university rugby in Canada? You can take this from either the perspective of the just within Ontario or go across the country as a whole.
Yeah, I think if we look at the nationals, we probably saw our most competitive nationals to date. We saw, a pretty big, a reasonable shuffle in terms of where teams finished. It's been very, very BC dominant. UBC obviously leading the way, and UVic being the only other team that's won. And often it's a UVic UBC final. But we saw a bit of a shakeup this year with TWU and UVic, a thriller that came down to the final whistle. Then McGill having won in the final whistle against TWU, and us with the final whistle with TWU. We saw like a lot of really, really competitive games. So I think from that perspective, it's fantastic. And then tying it to like the MLR, we look at the players that have gone on, like in terms of like first round draft picks, from last season. Maybe they didn't play in 2022, but in 2021, with Owen Rattan being a standout of the tournament, Callie Martinez having been a standout of the tournament. This year there was Denver Fat, Gabe Casey, Ethan Hager, who ended up going in the draft to I forget where he Dallas, I think he was selected by. Logan Martin Feek, who is a draft pick from the Arrows from before. So we're starting to see a lot of guys coming through that tournament and through the national or through the university system in general, being selected not only to the Toronto Arrows, but certainly it seems like teams from the United States have started to take notice. Because more than ever, we saw a lot of players get picked up. Jack Shaw, who's down in Atlanta, played for Bishops. We're seeing more and more guys getting picked up, which I think is just only going to strengthen our programs. Guys are going to start to see that as a legitimate pathway, that they can go to university, get a degree, get some sort of get the university experience, and then go on to play professionally. And maybe they do something where they're working while they're in their first years, while they're cutting their teeth in the MLR, and they're putting their degree to use as well. So I think it's really encouraging. As someone who believes that all of these guys need the academic, or they need something else outside of rugby, because rugby is not going to make any millionaires yet. So I think it's great to see that the university pathway has become such a vital tool for the MLR.
Yeah, you mentioned a lot of guys that have been drafted out of Canadian universities, and like as it stands right now, it might be a good way to transition in the academy. But how would you rate the jump from going and playing university rugby to being able to play in Major League Rugby?
I think it is. It's challenging, and certainly like we see, like we'll see like the handful of guys that I've named are currently playing first team rugby with MLR teams. Those guys would be exceptional, I would say. I think that divide is continuing to grow, which I think is excellent for the league. I think fundamentally, if it was easy to come out of university and go straight to the MLR, we maybe don't have a great product on our hands. But as that bridge, or as that gap grows, I think that's encouraging about the standard of the league. So it creates an interesting challenge for myself as the academy director to figure out ways of how we can bridge the gap so that players coming out of university are prepared to go straight into the MLR ideally.
For sure. And so I mean, we'll get into the Arrows Academy right now. So you're the academy director. You have high performance academy, a senior academy, and a junior academy as well. So could you just kind of give like a rundown of like the structure of the Arrows Academy and how you guys are developing players, where everybody fits in, and maybe what kind of like your daily activities of like running the academy sort of look like?
Sure. Yeah. So as you mentioned, we have the High Performance Academy group, and that group is a small subset of guys, 5 guys that train full time with the Arrows. So they're in every single day with the pro team. They have all their meals with the pro team. They're in every training session. They're in every gym session. So they're really getting the pro experience with that team. I work with them on a weekly basis on sort of development plans, making sure that they are seeking out the right, whether it be coaches, whether it be peers, in order to help hit their development plan. Alongside of those guys, we have what I kind of call our wider training group. And so our wider training group is based through the school year out of 2 sites, one in Concordia and one in the University of Guelph. And then for the summer, we'll go to 3 sites. So one in the east side of Toronto in the beaches, one in Guelph, and one in Montreal. So of those groups, we have approximately 60 guys or so in our wider training group. So they'll train a couple times a week in their regional sites. And then there's opportunities throughout the spring and summer that some of those guys, depending on where they are geographically, they can come in and train with the Arrows or train with maybe some of the Arrows guys who are injured, that sort of thing, to just try to expose them more to the environment. They'll also work a little bit with our strength and conditioning coaches, and our strength and conditioning coach will push some content out to them. So so I oversee those 3 sites and 2 sites through the school year, making sure that we are delivering similar content, that we are upskilling the guys, and they're just really skill focused, trying to eliminate that barrier of entry, that when they do get the opportunity, that they have the skill to do so. From that wider training group, that's where we pull our game rosters for our academy games, our senior academy games. We've been trying to get through just about all 60 of those guys if we can, just to see them in games. And we just recently, this past weekend, I was unfortunately away for it, but we had 40 or so players together for the weekend. We did a big, training session on Saturday, and then Sunday they got back together for an inter-squad game. So we can really compare apples to apples. Beneath that, we have, and this is run by our partners in Rugby Ontario. So it's really, at this point, like it's a partnership between the Rugby Ontario and the Arrows, which is the Ontario Blues Junior Arrows Academy, which is a bit of a mouthful. So they follow a similar model to our wider training group. So they have training center in Ottawa, in east side of Toronto, and then one in the west. This year was at Brock University, and they'll have approximately 50 kids in that environment as well. So we've seen a reasonable pull through into it from that group into our senior academy group. Again, the divide between the junior and the senior group, because those senior guys are in there for 3-4 years while they're in uni, is quite big. So certainly that'll be something of how do we close that gap while we're also trying to close the gap at the top.
So you obviously mentioned, with the wider training group, you cover quite a bit of geography with where those academies are located. So how do you go about like recruiting the players for the academy, and then maybe kind of like filtering that into the 60-man roster, or even narrowing it down to the 23-man rosters for like the games that you guys have been playing?
Yeah. So I suppose where we've chosen to place our academy centers has largely been based on 2 things. One, where the guys are geographically clustered. So if we think about Montreal, like obviously it's a big city, but also the number of universities and colleges that are in Montreal proper is quite high. And same with Guelph. Obviously, I'm probably a little bit biased, but certainly between Brock, McMaster, Western, Laurier, Waterloo, we're capturing 4 or 5 universities, and then certainly a number of colleges within that geographical, like about 80 to 90 minute drive. And then certainly with a lot of players coming from the GTA, that's why we add the GTA site for the summer, because a lot of players return home. So the filtering process is a lot of outreach. So I'm lucky enough, obviously, to coach in the OUA, so I'll get to see just about everybody through the season, and be able to review their video. Similarly, one of our partners, like John Lavery, who helps coach with the academy, he's at Concordia. So he'll get to see a lot of players from the RSEQ. And then we reach out to all of those university coaches, a number of the college coaches, just to talk about who we should be looking at, if there's anybody that we should bring in, and that sort of thing. The nice bit is, because especially through the January months when we're just getting, when we're starting to get together for our skills training, we have the ability to just bring guys in and have a look. And as long as we've got a good recommendation from a coach, we maybe have seen some video or have had eyes on them, we feel pretty comfortable to bring those guys in, try them out, have them work in our environment and see if we can, see if they show potential or see if there's opportunity there for them. So that's our vetting process right now, is a lot of speaking to coaches who know these players.
So when it comes to getting for the senior academy fixtures to play, obviously the budget is limited for MLR teams to come and play. I mean, it's been very confined to like New York's academy, New England's academy as well. And you've already played some games against Rugby Quebec this year, and you're going to be playing some fixtures for the Coast to Coast Cup later this year. How do you go about securing those fixtures and finding competitive opposition during the season?
Yeah, so it's last year, so we've done it kind of two different ways. So last year we tried to focus on playing some of the MLR academies that were near to us. So the New England Free Jacks and New York, of course, trying to secure a home and away fixture with them. The rationale being, if the expenditure to get down there, well, being quite steep, but if you get a return fixture out of it, you effectively divide that number in two, and then the guys get 2 games. The challenge that we had is a lot of, similar to us, a lot of the players that are the academy players from the MLR, our MLR peers, they're in NCAA programs or university programs that are a lot more restrictive in terms of it's tough for them to get access to their players until kind of mid to late June. Okay. So it wasn't as successful last year as we wanted it to be. So this year we looked at securing more fixtures with what I would call senior men representative sides. And then as many of those trying to get a home and away fixture as well. So we'll play a home and away with Rugby Quebec, who we played a few weeks ago. We'll play a home and away with Atlantic Select. So we just played them at home. And then of course our next fixture with them will be part of the Coast to Coast Cup. We'll also play a BC team at the Coast to Coast Cup. We're additionally going to play a team from a select side from upstate New York, which will be coming up. We'll play this Canada under 20, where I think I'll just stand at half field. We'll play them in a few weeks as part of Canada under 20's preparation for the Junior World Trophy qualifiers. So we feel like we've found a very appropriate level of games where we'll be challenged in different ways. Certainly playing against senior men's sides, our front rowers learn some new tricks, and they're playing against bigger, more experienced men, and I think there's a lot of value in that. I think playing against guys who have come through maybe just a few years too early but are still excellent players, that really challenge our guys physically, I think is what our players need the most. So I'm totally happy playing some of these senior men representative sides, because I think it is the competition, the appropriate competition our players need. And then playing against Canada under 20, I think they'll get a totally different experience where it'll be a fairly equal playing field in terms of peers on peers. Maybe players who have just come out of the under 20 program being in the game. Some players that weren't selected for the 20s program that want to put their hand up and say, you know what, I know you've got the US and you might have Kenya afterwards. I want you to consider me. So I think that'll be an excellent game too. And that's going to be super competitive.
I was going to say, how would you divide up? Obviously, you said for yourself, you might just have to stand at, at the halfway line. But there's obviously a lot of Arrows Academy guys that are also part of the U20 teams and stuff like that, right? So how do you foresee maybe those rosters playing out, or have you guys like talked about that at all, about how that's going to get split up?
Yeah, for sure. So I suppose like we're lucky with the Arrows Academy that fundamentally we don't need the players to be playing for us in order to continue to see them and continue to help with their development. So and whereas the U20 program is such like an important part of a teenager's development, like so players that are currently within this under 20 program would 100% play for the 20s program. So we would take them out of our selections for the Arrows Academy. We would want them to have that experience wearing the maple leaf as much as they can. We get to see them. They're just wearing a different color, so it doesn't bother me. And then we will pick. We'll try to skew quite young for that game for the Arrows Academy, where we're picking a number of players who were at maybe our top 50 camp for the Canada under 20s. Give them another shot to be selected. We'll pick some players that maybe are a year young for the 20s, so that we can see them a year out and begin tracking them a little bit. So we can be very strategic in our selections for this game.
And from a coaching perspective, I know you said you're going to sit at halfway and watch the games, but even in the build-up, do you have to commit to like just one team, or are you going to go into just basically like feed information to both teams of like, this is what the attack is going to be for the under 20s, this is what the head coach has said for the Arrows Academy?
I mean, there's certainly some overlap in what we'll be doing intentionally, but when I come back from Uruguay and at the end of next week, I'll be back out at our Guelph regional site, working with those guys. When Canada under 20 is here, I will be with them. I think I'll probably be I might wear a Canada t-shirt and an Arrows hat or something, but certainly when they're here, prepping them for the Junior World Trophy qualifiers will be a big priority of mine. I have some amazing partners that help me run the academy, like Adam Moz, who coaches with me at Guelph, does a tremendous amount with the academy. From leading the regional training sites at Guelph largely to he's usually the head coach when I'm not there for the academy. So I have a lot of trust in him that he can do the job. John Lavery usually makes the trip up from Montreal, though a midweek might be tough. And now we've asked Ian McLeish from the Beaches, who works with the junior academy, to help out with our Eastern academy group. So we'll bring those players in and maybe even some senior Arrows players to help out as some positional experts. So they'll be well supported. Both teams will be well supported.
Excellent. Perfect. So, as mentioned, the academy has played 2 games so far this year. You played, had a tight loss to Quebec, and then you had an unreal win against the Atlantic Selects with a big second half there. How would you kind of rate the first 2 games that you've played as the academy, and any players and stuff that you think have kind of stood out that might give Arrows fans something to be excited about as the academy continues to grow and guys continue like Brendan Black or Hank Stevenson end up on the the big club Arrows roster?
Yeah, definitely. So we went into these first 2 games especially with a plan to see as many people as we could. So looking at the Quebec team, so the Rugby Quebec team, the team that played against Rugby Quebec, and the Atlantic Selects, the team that played against the Atlantic Selects, we were able to see somewhere in the neighborhood of about 40 of our Arrows Academy players. And so it was very intentional to kind of get through as many of our wider training group as we could to help with those selections. That will, as I said, for the Canada under 20, we'll skew a bit younger, but the information that we've gathered based on those players, how they performed, their potential upside, that will help inform some of the selections coming towards the end and into the Coast to Coast Cup. So those games have been, massively important for us. I think in terms of like players that have stood out, I think our HPA guys, so Brendan, Hank, Tom Artman, David Skolin, Jacob Ince, I thought, although a few guys picked up injuries, I thought during the times that they played, they were quite good. I think there's certain players that I'm really excited about. Like this, there's a player by the name of James Stockwood who played number 5 for us, started against the Atlantic Selects and played 80, and then came off the bench against Rugby Quebec. He's about 6'6", 6'7", currently weighing in about 300 pounds, but moves and is athletic. So guys like that, I think, some work to do, of course, but that physical potential is just massive and just crazy. I'm trying to think. We've seen, some really good young back rowers. Max Goodwin, who is actually invited into the HPA, but just due to some work commitments, couldn't make it. Will Matthews, who played last week for us in the back row as well, from Queen's University, is fantastic. Jalel Rezig from ETS in Montreal, another guy. So we're starting to see a lot of really young, talented players, and then just seeing them all together, I think it has been, excellent. And then, guys from other institutions, I think maybe there's a misconception that it's a lot of Guelph and a lot of Queens, but a guy by the name of Devin Olson from Brock University has been fantastic at scrum half. Same with Kevin O from the University of Waterloo. Steve Comerford from Brock University. We've got really nice representation from a lot of the universities, which I think is really pleasing.
Is that something that you guys are like consciously trying to do? Like get guys from a whole bunch of different schools, or is it just working out that, the top 60 guys, the guys that you want, just happen to be widely from across the board?
I would say like we are conscious to not try to pick people just from certain programs. I think if guys have gone to other institutions because that's where they see themselves, we want to make sure that they still get the same opportunities. And so I wouldn't say we're only picking them to fill out because it looks nice in a post that we had representation from 8 or 9 different schools. I think every player that we have selected really and truly belongs there, because there are some great players within the university programs. And we're doing our best to find them and unearth them and continue to work, partner in their development, I should say.
Yeah. So another question I kind of have about the academy is that obviously, the Arrows Academy, you're trying to develop players for the Toronto Arrows. But the Major League Rugby is also a league that has a draft. And it has a collegiate draft. So players, as you highlighted earlier, there's been plenty of guys from across Canadian universities that have been drafted. So, and unfortunately, given where the Arrows currently are in the standings, I'm sure fans are going to start thinking about the draft and like where that draft pick is going to end up being. But how does the academy factor into a league that has a system with a draft? Like, is there any like protections and stuff in place, or like, how do you kind of go about the mixture of being able to develop guys for the Arrows team, but also, maybe not having guys that technically would be draft eligible get poached, or how does that whole system within Major League Rugby work with the academies and the draft?
That's a great question. I don't really know. I think if you look at a lot of other major sports, very rarely does it have both an academy system and a draft-based system. I suppose I understand it because as like a North American market, we're all very, very familiar with draft models, and a little bit less so with academy models. I suppose it creates some interesting sort of, I don't want to say problems, just maybe situations in that, we could have players that are part of our academy decide to go into the draft, which I don't think is necessarily a bad thing because, fundamentally the Arrows are only ever going to be able to take on a certain number of players. So if we are helping produce really good Canadian rugby players and we produce an abundance of those players and they have to go somewhere else, then I still think we've done a really good job. I don't think we're there yet, but if we get to that point where we're producing so many players that they can't all go into the Arrows and they're going elsewhere, like I said, I think that would be a massive success. I think that, like, if you look at Leinster, that's probably what they're doing. Like, there's a number of players that play in that league where, you know, they've come through the Leinster Academy or the Saracens Academy at the Premiership level. So, you know, aspirationally, that's somewhere I would love to get. And if we get there, fantastic. I think the other sort of, so one of the things that exists in the MLR, as I'm sure you know, is that homegrown policy. So that if you can demonstrate that you have a player that has met certain metrics in terms of number of training sessions, number of games, they've signed a homegrown player policy, you can sort of claim them, for lack of a better word, so that they're not draft eligible to other teams. So certainly, but there's a limit on the number of players you can do. You can do that too.
Okay.
Yeah. So, you know, there's gonna be certain players that, you know, coming out of the back of this season, I think we will probably look at utilizing that policy. So we'll see how that goes. The other interesting piece is we'll have guys in the academy, and then potentially we'll get some of their peers from, you know, across the country, get drafted and sort of slot into it, you know, above them, which, again, I don't think is a bad thing. I think it's just an interesting thing that you don't always see. You could have two players that play against each other, you know, in the men's university final. One player gets drafted and one player doesn't, and then maybe one player ends up in the senior team and the other one is still in the academy for whatever reason. You know, it's usually justifiable, or not usually. It is 100% justifiable. I think it just creates like a difference that we don't see in a lot of other sports.
Yeah. I guess, is that something that you guys are kind of maybe looking to do? Maybe kind of similar to, like, you know, a hockey player getting drafted and then going to play in like the AHL or something, is like when you make that draft selection, go play at the academy for maybe a year or two and then make the jump? Or are we far enough along for that to be a thought at this point?
Well, I think it is. Like, I think, you know, the academy, well, you know, its fundamental focus is on development. But I think that there's some rules in place that when you do draft a player, there is a certain level of contract that you have to give to them. So I don't think we'd be drafting players to join the academy per se. Right. However, what we could see happen is if we draft a potential prospect and he comes in at a position where there's a lot of depth, or maybe he comes off injury, the academy can certainly be a tool in that player's development where they'll train full time with the pro side. But when there's game opportunities that maybe he's not seeing at the professional level, we can drop him into an academy game. And we've done that in the past.
Okay, so we're moving on now to talk about your role within age grade rugby for Rugby Canada. So obviously the different age grades, so Canada men's U20, you'll have players then that progress into the men's first senior 15, I'll say. However, in the past World Cup cycle, that has been severely derailed due to the pandemic. So with what's essentially 2 years of minimal or no age grade rugby, how significant has that effect been on Rugby Canada's men's teams?
Well, I don't think it had an effect necessarily on you know, recent performances per se. Just with our players, you know, we just don't see a lot of 21, 22, 19-year-olds joining the senior men's program. So I think you know, not qualifying for the World Cup, I think there's a number of different things that play there. I think what's been really real in all of my involvement with both the U18s and the U20s has been, you guys are part of the solution, which I think is a really important opportunity for these young men. I remember we were running our top, it might have been our West training camp our East training camp for the Canada U18 team, the morning that that Canada lost their qualification game. And, there was obviously a very somber mood in the group, but it quickly turned to, the chatter amongst a group of 17-year-old, 16-year-old players that the next opportunity for Canada to qualify for a World Cup, there could very well be players from that room who are featuring in that team. So they immediately saw it as an opportunity to sort of further enhance Canadian rugby. And certainly, my experience in the last year with that program, then coming in with the U20s last year, and we just finished prior to our meeting here, the jersey presentation for this year's U20 group. The chat is always about the opportunity that exists for these guys. These players could push on in the next year or two into hopefully some senior men's national games where they have an opportunity to now qualify for the following World Cup. And certainly if they're not involved in those games, by 2027, 4 years on, these players are going to be 24 years old. I would expect you do see some of these guys. So this is all a major part in preparing them for those games and hopefully for that next World Cup, because, being on tour, going through the grind, living in a different country, all of that stuff, people might take it for granted. It's not that easy. And, just being on these tours helps them prepare for that. And I mean that completely, both on the field, but off the field, certainly. I think this is a massive learning curve for the players, but it's really exciting. And overall, the guys get really excited about the prospect. They see it, they know it, they know what's at stake. So it's awesome. And then further out, I had coffee today with Gaston Mirez from
Nice.
Former Toronto Arrow, and obviously, here in Uruguay and playing for Peñarol, and gearing up for his second, I think maybe second at least, World Cup, and him just talking about like the opportunity that these young guys have, and just obviously the pride that he has for Uruguay, but then also a small piece for Canada because he spent 4 years there. But he probably talked to me 2 or 3 times about the opportunity that these guys have and how excited he is for them. And I'm super excited. Like, he's going to be at the game, so I'm excited to introduce him to a few of our current academy boys, and yeah, just continue to spend some time with him.
Did you get him a Canada jersey to wear during the game?
So I don't think he'll wear it, but he gave me a Uruguay golf shirt today. So I've got a golf shirt for him, and his brother's the manager of the Peñarol team. So I'm going to give him a Canada training top and hopefully get a piece of Peñarol kit.
Nice.
And Diana, so I see him almost every morning too, former Toronto Arrow, and he's ripping it up down here, which is super cool to see.
Yeah, I keep with the SLAR. It sounds like Deanna's been like one of the best players in the league for during the course of the season so far.
Yeah, I think he's got 12 tries or something like that. So
yeah, he scored a try in every game he's played for Yarrow this season. So
yeah, that's not bad.
No, not at all.
Get him a Canada jersey too. So as we kind of mentioned, obviously you're in Uruguay. You're playing Uruguay yesterday by the time this comes out, I guess. And you got Spain later this week, which hasn't happened yet. What are you kind of looking for out of these next 2 games against Uruguay, against Spain, as you guys are kind of continuing to prep for the U20 World Trophy later this year?
Yeah, so I mean, the biggest thing that we recognize we have to do is we obviously have to beat the United States in the 2-game aggregate in early June. So we're really using these 2 games as preparation for that. So everything that a lot of our game planning, a lot of how the content that we're delivering and layering in is all with playing the United States. So perhaps some of our tactics might not be as effective against a team like Uruguay or a team like Spain, but we feel the pressure we're going to face and trying to execute under pressure with those tactics in these upcoming games are going to help us prepare for the United States. So it's a bit of a funny sort of endeavor in that we're you always tell players like you never want to look past the game, and certainly we're not telling these players to look past Uruguay or look past Spain, but we are building for something bigger down the line. So balancing the tactical component of prepping for that while making sure that we're prepared for Uruguay is really interesting. But the guys are really bought into it. They seem to be enjoying it, and we feel like we take a big step forward every single day. And knowing the Uruguayans, the type of rugby they play, it's going to be massive for our preparation. They play an incredibly fast and incredibly physical style of rugby. So they're certainly going to challenge us. And I think it's the exact challenge that we look for. Our head coach here, Adam Roberts, has talked about previously doing sort of a 2-week training camp leading into it, and maybe being prepared that way. But we feel this, being able to play a game and then critically review and then implement some change and then go out and do it again, I think that probably puts us in way better stead moving forward. And then we even have a third game. So we feel like we'll be, well attuned to the pressure we might face by the USA.
Yeah, it definitely looks like an interesting path ahead, playing Uruguay and then Spain and then the Arrows Academy before these 2 games in North Carolina, and then hoping that you're successful and make it to the Juniors World Trophy later this year. While you're the attack coach for Canada Men's under 20s, you're also the head coach of Canada Men's under 18s. And last summer, you took them on tour to Amsterdam, where they were playing Dutch under 20s, Belgian under 20s, USA. First of all, having a bunch of 18-year-olds go to Amsterdam, we're famous for their psychopaths as well as other things. But how was that tour for an experience to get guys to witness like European rugby? And also, are there any other future tours planned for the U18s?
Yeah, so the tour last year was incredible. There were certainly some challenges, like being in a city, like Amsterdam, with whatever 28 under 18-year-olds. Thankfully, the hotel was a fair distance from downtown, out by Schiphol Airport. So we had a bit of separation there. But it was a fantastic tournament. It was very, very well run by the Dutch Rugby Union. The competition was completely appropriate. And the biggest and most important part, I think, for these players was, don't forget, these players were the ones that were probably the most impacted from a representative rugby standpoint by the pandemic. So for these guys, they lost their under 17 provincial year. They lost their under 16 provincial year. This potentially was for some the first away tournament in a representative program. So there was a lot of learning that went on there. I think that plays a massive part in some of these players that are playing tomorrow. So I can think of 4 off the top of my head, at least 4 players from that U18 tour last summer that are with our U20 group. 3 of them starting tomorrow, which is super exciting. Sorry, I'm 5 of them. 4 of them are starting tomorrow. So I think that's fantastic in terms of their preparation. With the 18s this year, they are back to the same tournament. I have, whether it's formal or informal, sort of withdrawn just because I'm anticipating and hoping that we qualify for the World Trophy. So I withdrew after our last camp in November, just so that I didn't want to be withdrawing late from the 18s program. So I helped with our East selection camp, and then I've withdrawn. So Mike Curran, as a program director, working with Bill Chamberlain, who came last year with us, and Hubert Bidens, and a few other coaches will be taking that forward to play in that tournament.
Yep, definitely a lot going on, a lot of progress. Obviously, as you mentioned, those players from U18 now in U20 and by this time this episode goes out, hopefully we'll be congratulating them on their first win in Montevideo before the second one this Saturday. Again, Cory, thank you so much for joining us for this episode of the podcast. If any of our listeners and watchers have enjoyed this episode, be sure to check out more, as well as written pieces on our new website, therougerugby.ca. You can also find our podcast on Spotify, S4P, and Apple Podcasts. We also have a YouTube channel at The Rouge Rugby with episodes of the podcast, as well as extra interviews with players and coaches. Make sure to like and subscribe and hit the bell notification to stay up to date with all our videos. We also have social media, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok, all at The Rouge Rugby. Now, Cory, I know you got a lot on your plate at the moment, but when is the next Arrows Academy game that will be held at York University? I think it's Alumni Field.
Yeah, so the next one at York University will be June 11th. I think we're still nailing down the time, but likely if it's will be roughly 3 hours before the pro game. So June 11th against New York State selects. We'll also be after that, we'll be heading off to Halifax for the Coast to Coast Cup. So anybody out there, I know our game against the Atlantic Selects on the final weekend will be at their Graves Oakley or the amazing stadium where the Halifax Wanderers play, where we played last year. I think we play BC potentially at the Halifax Tars Rugby Club in their gorgeous new clubhouse. So it's exciting times for them, and I think Canadian rugby as a whole. And I know the Atlantic Selects will do a great job in streaming and pushing those matches out there.
Wonderful. Well, definitely looking forward to watching those games. Derek, where can people find you on social media?
At Brissette the Jet across all social media platforms.
And you can find me across social media at Hardman, spelled H4RDMAN. Well, Cory, again, thank you very much for joining us. I know you've got a busy schedule down there in Uruguay, and we're wishing you and the boys all the best. Derek, thanks again for joining me for this episode, and thanks to all our listeners and watchers for joining us for the latest episode of the Rouge Rugby podcast, where we talk about real Canadian rugby. We hope you can join us again next time.